Hi, my name is Kevin McNeil, and I am doing this particular video to talk about something that has been troubling me for quite a while, and that's race, racism, slavery, um, the social divide, the racial divide that we have um, in this country here in America. And I want to look at it from the standpoint of first of all, let me say this is my opinion. This is how I see it. So there are. I'm sure this will get many people who have a lot to say on one way or the other. So if you comment, fine, comment. I'll probably respond to your comments, but um, make sure your comments are respectful and thought provoking. Because what I want to do is invoke thought. I want to muse you. I'm not here to entertain or to amuse. To muse, to make you think, to make you think about some things. Make all of us, even myself, think about some things, possibly in ways that had not currently been thought about before. To see if we can generate having a conversation and not just talking at each other, because that's a big part of our problem. Um, race, the racism problem here in the United States, I am going to say is squarely on the shoulders of the church. It's the church's fault. Now, before staunch Christians, start to run off and say, "Oh, this is just some guy out there spewing stuff because he hates the church and he's trying to turn young minds," or people who are in that, bandwagon in that corner who want to say, "Yes, somebody's talking my language and da da da," and bump the church and all of this. Um, Let me first cast that by saying I'm a Christian. I'm a born again believer. I believe in God. I've studied the Bible quite a bit. Been to school to study the Bible. I'm actually the pastor of a church, a Christian church, Mount Zion Christian Church in Floyd, Virginia. Look it up. Come see me. We're on Facebook. Hey, um, have us on Facebook and YouTube. So, and so as pastor of a church who still fairly young, dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. I say, first and foremost, the issue of race relations in America is the church's fault. Here's why I say that. Let's take the historical perspective. Back in 1618, 1619, when slaves were Africans were being imported to this country, um, much the same way we import beer and other stuff now, packed into ships and brought over. Um, they were forced into Christianity, and I use that term kind of loosely, and I'll explain that in a minute. Because Christianity was used as a tool at that time by early church leaders. They used slavery was kind of used as a tool to get people to convert to Christianity. So what the church said, that if you became a Christian, we would you would stop being a slave, and then you could become an indentured servant, or something along those lines, and so you would go from being a slave to being free. But it lasted from about 1618 to about 1680, 1681. About that time, they started to realize, hey, if we import slaves over, um, it's cheaper to pay for the slave once than every a few years you got to pay for them again, because um, the guy converts to Christianity, and after a period of time, 6 or 7 years, he becomes a free man, and he may choose not to work for me anymore and go somewhere else. And so then they introduced what was called forced slavery at that point in time. And so what ends up happening is people were still being forced to convert to Christianity or to the Anglo European Americanized version of Christianity, based on the fact that anybody coming in speaking another language, looking different, those things, they considered Africans to be inferior, of course. And, there are a lot of people who talk about those things, and we all know that. And so, but what happens in 1680, 1681 is they stop allowing individuals who convert to Christianity to buy their way out of slavery, because it didn't make sense. And so it became a choice of individuals. The slave owners basically told the church, yes, you're going to still support slavery in this fashion, but with these little changes. It's not the first time this has happened. Constantine, does some similar work in 325 AD. One of the other things that you want to look at with that, I think, is the fact that when you start to look at the early church, you start to look at what the church looks like, then you have individuals who are looking for things that can help them make money. And so what happens is the slave owners basically co-opt the church to use Christianity as a tool to justify slavery. And in many cases, churches do buy into that because, of course, back then slave owners had the money, and so they were the people who could support the church the most, much the way many of our churches even now today have pastors and elders and deacons who end up catering to these upstanding, upright Christians because they are good givers and things like that, which is wrong. Just want to put that out there. So you got these people who now are taking slavery and taking Christianity and trying to use it as a tool to advance their own social economic cause. And they are using scripture and text where it talks about, having the master and the master being good to the servant being obedient to the master, and saying that, okay, we're going to convert you to Christianity, and we're going to convert you to Christianity, and we're going to highlight these things that say that as a slave, you got to be dutiful and work hard for your master and do all these things. Where particularly in the Old Testament, there were many texts and instances, which is how it's all started back in 1618, with this idea that after 7 years, I buy my way out of slavery. And so they flipped the script. So this sets up this long trek from 1618 till about, you would say it's the Emancipation Proclamation, but you're really getting into the 1960s before many churches started to back away from those old precepts, which you find in many denominations even now. The reason why there's so much separation in denomination is because of these early church texts. However, what I want to point out is something in a little while, that we must understand that Christianity was not new to the African. Christianity came to Africa well before it was in Egypt, or in England and in Europe and those places. So Africans were not new to Christianity. They just practiced it in a form that was conducive to their culture. And you know how it is. People look at culture and they say, your culture is different from my culture. It makes me uncomfortable. It must be wrong. And that's generally what happens even now today, because I don't understand it, because it's not something that's a part of my normal culture, because it doesn't make me feel the way that I think it should make me feel. It must be wrong. So the church supports slavery openly until you hit the mid 60s or the early 60s. And then there starts to be a slow shift in America that takes about 20 years, really, I think, before you really see some mainline denominational um, things that happen, which is why you have, if you go back and look at most denominations in the 80s and 90s, began to write letters and to offer up these apologies to Black America for their support of slavery for all of those years. Many denominations where you see there are um, there's a Black Baptist and a White Baptist church, but they don't operate under the same umbrella. Well, that's because there was a split. The church that I pastor is Disciples of Christ. Well, in the Disciples of Christ, there are Black disciples and white disciples. We have the General Assembly and the National Convocation. That church split over 135, 40 years ago, and that split was over slavery and the treatment of Africans Africans in this country. And so you had these two factions, these two bodies that were separate, that stayed separate up until about the mid 80s. And when they tried to come back together, and are still in that process of coming back together, if we're honest about who we are. So you've got these people who go through this process, through this time of trying to figure out, who they are and what they're about and where they're going and how they're going to get there. And then we start to understand and to realize that we've got some major problems. Well, one of the things that does become a major problem is the fact that, because remember I said Africans had already experienced Christianity. If you go back even in Acts, it talks about the Ethiopian who Peter talks to and or Stephen talks to, or Philip talks to, and they have these great conversations. He begins to explain to him what he's reading. We can start talking to early Christian times. We look at people like Tertullian and others who themselves did great work as far as creating foundational things that we still use in the mantra of the church today. The idea of the Trinity came from Tertullian, who was an African, and he was a Christian theologian whose stuff is still relevant. Don't want to shock anybody. And so what happened was the African who came to America as a slave, and then after being imported here as a slave, began and started to study Christianity. They began to realize that even though they may have studied or practiced their own form of Christianity, monotheism, this great deity in the sky kind of a concept, they understood it always. For the African, it was always a liberationist type theology. I believe that liberation theology is, kind of looked at as a 60s thing because of the movement of the church at that time. But when you really look at it, even in all through the history of this nation, during slavery, the reason why many slave rebellions here in Virginia, I live in Virginia now, and so here in Virginia, Nat Turner, that slave rebellion happened because slaves said slavery is wrong. The Bible supports us being free men, and so since we are made by God, we should have just as much access to everything as you do, and we are justified in being free. And so you end up with a lot of people who don't realize that there was that conflict even then when you start looking at theologies and opposing theologies really at that time in the church. And so we don't just see it happen in the 60s with Martin Luther King having to write the letter from Birmingham jail, not because he is mad at the white oppressor, but because he is mad at his Christian brothers, and in some cases, and many of those African Americans who had written and were upset with his coming and all of that. And so he pens his letter from a Birmingham jail, and you can find his book also, Why We Can't Wait, and that full letter is listed in the book. And he's upset because y'all read the same book that I'm reading. You understand the same thing I read. You've gone to these schools. You've studied the same things. How is it that you're laying down and that you're acquiescing? And the answer is simple. The church took on the flavor of the world. The scripture says in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, that, brethren, I beseech you, therefore, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto the Lord, which is your reasonable service. But then it goes on in verse 2 to say, be ye not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And the problem with the church is the church has allowed itself to be transformed, and not into the image of Christ, but to the image of the world. And there is where the struggle is, because instead of the church standing up and saying right is wrong is wrong, we've gone, okay. And so we have now these churches and these places and these centers and people who say, with these centrist kind of theologies, where we're saying things like, it's okay. We're using terms like open and affirming, which is dangerous, because when you're saying opening and affirming to what exactly? And where is the limit? Where is the line? And that becomes dangerous, because it almost becomes to this place where the church is unwilling to stand up and to point out, in some cases, right and wrong. And we don't want people to feel uncomfortable. However, Jesus Christ himself, who we also to model ourselves after, spent a great deal of time in dealing with church folk, making them uncomfortable. Yes, we are supposed to take in people who are hurting, who are beat up, who are bruised, who are lame, who are maimed, who need healing, and do what we can to heal those people and to make those people's lives better, and then to give them this Jesus who will help liberate their thinking, liberate them spiritually, and help move them to a better place. However, in that transaction, while you are able to come in, you are able to worship, at some point, I should be pressing and pushing you to consider your life versus the scripture, and saying to yourself, what needs to change, what needs to get better, what needs to be redefined, what am I doing that is outside the construct of what this book says. And it's not what feels good to my flesh, but it is what's right according to the book. And the problem that many people have today is people want to do what feels good to the flesh. And churches are saying, okay, yeah, just as long as you pay your tithes, as long as we're meeting our budget, as long as we're able to do these things, everything will be all right. And let me, I don't want to sound like I am being unfair to preachers and the pastors, because, hey, I am one. I get it. I understand. It is difficult sometimes when you're pastoring and you're doing the best you can. You want to see people come in, and you've got to pay bills, and you've got to do those things. And so you've got to be concerned about the physical as well as the physical and the spiritual. You've got to kind of have your head wrapped around all that stuff. But the motivations can't change. I get paid. I do receive a paycheck, although I am what is considered a bivocational minister, in that I do work outside the church. The church is not my only job. There are a great many of my friends who are not bivocational. Their church provides their main source of income. And many of those cases, we have conversations about remaining on the edge of the front line and saying and doing the things that the scripture mandates that we might say and do, regardless of what it looks like. We have to understand also that in the idea of personal interest and personal gain, many of us have stopped supporting the church, what takes away the clout of the minister, when it comes to standing up to power and having a social change be effective. In many of our cases, we say we look around and we say, "There's not a minister in my area who can pull together a group of people and go down to city hall or town council or wherever the case may be and say something and get this changed or get the mayor or whatever to come out and let's not just have a conversation, but let's exact real change." And part of the problem is because many of us will sit behind our computers, will stay on social media, yes, yes, yes. Oh, they need to have this meeting, but then when the meeting happens, we don't show up. And so there's not that support. And so the preacher or the community leader may show up, but then there's nobody there with them. So how strong is your voice? So why should I take you seriously? Martin Luther King and others, we look at those individuals, but the strength and the power of them, of many of those early church leaders, when it came to rights and things that we were trying to get, many times the strength of those individuals were the willingness of the people that they were trying to affect to stand behind them and with them and go through the crucible with them, so that people began to understand, hey, we need to pay attention to this. And that brings me to the crux of what a lot of this really is all about. We say, where are you going with this? Well, looking at the state of our communities, I made the statement a couple of times that in most cases, when you look at the state of a community, its health, its wealth, its whatever, many times is directly reflective of the spiritual health and wealth of the churches in the community. So what do I mean by that is, if you have a community where violence and those things are permeated, many times the church in that community is simply either for whatever reason become ineffective or just turned a blind eye and allowed those things to happen. And if the church is fractured, the community is going to be fractured. Because if the church is fractured, then the family becomes fractured, which means that fractured people are produced both physically in the family and spiritually in the church, and they will end up doing and saying things that become detrimental to people around them. And so it becomes this thing of, when you're looking at individuals who don't have good moral standing, good moral background, who don't have a healthy perspective when it comes to human life, who don't have a healthy perspective when it comes to arts and education, who don't have a healthy perspective when it comes to family and caring and being empathetic and those kind of things. People in those circumstances, situations, in most cases, there's a breakdown in the family that directly relates to a breakdown in their church. And now, for the Muslims or whoever else, don't go pat yourself on the back going, oh, he's really tearing the church down, because you guys don't help in most cases. Because when you look at Christianity at its root core, because I hear a lot of people say Christians talk bad about Muslims and other people because they don't understand the religion, and that Muslims do a whole lot more studying about Christianity than Christians do about Muslim doctrine, and in a lot of cases that's true. However, what I think most people miss about Christianity is Christianity is not exclusive. It is meant to be inclusive, which means that even as a Muslim, as a Hindu, as a Baha'i, whoever you are, as a Christian, I am taught to love you and respect you as a person, and it is through my love and respect and honor of the person that I win the person over, not pointing the finger at somebody and saying something. And I'm taught that I can work with a person even if I don't always agree with them ideologically or theologically. However, I am also taught in that from the prophetic side, that when I do see, hear, know that there's something wrong, it is incumbent upon me that I speak on it. that I do what I can do to affect change in that area, that I take the part of that. And I can do that because the Bible says I can speak things in love. I can do that without damaging the person. And many times what happens is we do damage each other because everybody's trying to be right. Everybody's trying to win. Everybody's trying to win the argument. Everybody's trying to win and show up somebody or make fun of somebody. And let me say this. If you live your life on a day-to-day basis and you're constantly trying to make somebody else look bad, throw shade or whatever else, you are not living a true Christian life. Because Christianity is not about throwing shade. Christianity is not about making somebody else look bad or feel bad. Christianity is not about putting stuff out there so that people who see it and hear it will end up feeling bad or looking bad in their own or the eyes of someone else. Christianity is about loving people, respecting people, and pushing people to Christ. And about dispelling the rumors and the myths in the process. So if we want to end racism, if we want to end miseducation in our school systems, if we want to end unemployment, we want to end drug addictions, we want to end sexual crimes and all of that, we want to end all these things we say we don't like, then we have to be honest and say it. For the Black American, it's going to start with the church. You got to be able to empower the church, and then be willing to stand not just with other Christians, but with Muslims and people from other backgrounds who speak the same truth, that this is wrong or that is incorrect or this needs to be changed. In the Black community, one of the issues that I see people have all the time, and I love reading stuff on social media. I shouldn't say I love it. I do read it because I want to understand what the people around me in my communities are thinking. But I'm amazed at the people who will talk bad about the church, but then complain about jobs or complain about this or complain about that. And I always say this: if you're going to complain about church, that's why I don't go to church. Okay, so there are some churches that have issues. The same way there are preachers that have issues and whatever. However, if you go to a restaurant, if you go to Burger King and you decide, I do not like the food at Burger King, do you stop going to all restaurants? Because if you don't stop to going to all restaurants because you didn't like Burger King, why do you stop going to all churches? Because you had a bad experience at one church, or because you didn't like the message at one church, or because this one preacher messed up, or that one preacher said this, or whatever. And as far as messages, we've got to move past that place where we're looking for people to tickle our ears and meet our expectation of making us shout or making us dance or whatever the case may be. Here's the thing: if a athlete can have a bad game, if a cook can have a bad meal, a preacher can have a bad sermon. It is what it is. You do not have bring your A game every day. Sometimes you have to come back and say, let's look at this thing over a period of time. And if that just happens to not be the place for you, find a place for you. You with your boo thing with whoever it is, male or female. I'm sure for most of us, for many of us, you didn't stop with the first person. They broke your heart, or they just turned out not to be the right, or they didn't, whatever. You moved on to the next. It's for some people, hey, don't raise our hands because we don't want anybody, to have to explain anything later. Some of us went through several tens of boo things until we found somebody, and some of us are still looking for that somebody. Having those tens of people that we've gone through. So just because one church doesn't do it a particular way, or one church has had an issue, it doesn't mean every church will. And so we have to be very careful about how we do that, because it sends this message, and then people say, well, And then many of those people, those same first people who was talking about being hypocritical, and I always say, no, that you're the hypocrite. I'm gonna be honest and say I'm flawed. I got some issues. I made mistakes, stuff I'm not proud of. As a tough now, I'm trying to fix it up my life. Oh, a preacher that's not perfect. Sorry, yeah. However, we're all in this. You know, my ability to preach, teach, pastor, counsel, any of that stuff. It's not really. It's not. It's the Spirit of God that works in me. Paul says we have this treasure in earthen vessels, but the excellency and the power be of God and not of man. So if I ever preach right, pray right, teach right, talk right, do anything, counsel right, it's really God's power in me that is causing that thing to happen. I'm just the willing vessel of the moment. Where do we go from here? Because I didn't expect it to be this long. But where do we go from here? I think where we go from here is being honest about what's going on in the world around us and honest about our parts that we've played and allowing things to be the way they are. Too many people want to sit on the sidelines and talk, but not stand up and take part. You got your kids, and your kids are straight A students. You still need to be just as worried about the kid that is not a straight A student as proud as you are about your kids being a straight A student. I had 2 sons still in school. Last report cards, oldest son straight A's, younger son all A's, 1B. That's great. I love it. Yes. However, I am still concerned about the state of the school systems and how kids are coming to school. And I actually work in the school system currently. But I still have to be concerned with other kids. Why? Because those children are also important. Their futures are important. And what kind of parent, what kind of person am I if I say to my sons, I want you to be smart, I want you to get good grades, I want you to go to college, or you to have this trade and be able to support yourself to do all these things and have all these things happen for you and have all these things come true. But rest your friends, nah, I'm not really worried about them. Not so much. That's a very wrong, very bad place to be. And I've heard people say, well, I've got my kids through college or through school and I've done my job. And I'm really? Really? That's kind of still a poor attitude to take. One of the things that we as African Americans, I think, have lost is as we're understanding and reminding ourselves that we are communal people. We were meant to be a community. We come from a background where everything was shared community, much the same way as the American Indian. And so this idea of owning land and owning a person is a little foreign to us. And so we were raised early in our infancy in this country by the community, even through the 60s and 70s and 80s, that it was a community. As a child, I had an incident where I did something in the community that I should not have done. I got 5 whoopings for that thing. And to this day, it's still a joke among people that actually know what happened. And the first 3 came from people who were not a part of my family, and what we would consider biological family. So we have to understand that now we live in this time where everybody is so self-centered and centric in that way, and that I and my rule the day when it comes to conversation and how we look at things. But we don't want people to talk to our children and to correct our children, to tell us anything, and that's just wrong. If somebody's trying to give your child good advice, don't be mad because they're trying to give your child good advice. You amen the good advice because that helps you out in the long run. It helps that child out. Shame on the parent who doesn't ever believe the teacher, always believes the child, because Some of y'all children are just rotten. Hey, I go to school. So I'm like, really? You really thought that was a good idea? You know, um, go in, be active participants in the lives of our children, not allowing technology to take over and to rule and to do these things, because they say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am to you at home, but they cuss the teacher out at school. I don't know how many times I've sat in on something and the child that cursed, I mean, fifth, sixth grade, cursing and talking and all of this. But as soon as you get that parent to finally come in for a parent teacher conference, ma'am, really? I didn't know you said ma'am. You know what that, really? You know that word? And I've also had, where parents come in and don't believe the teacher. They don't even really listen to the teacher. It's coming in, I'm here to defend my child. Well, your child was wrong, with this issue with cell phones. And the school rules that no cell phone. Your child had the cell phone out. They were doing stuff. It should have been in their locker. We took it. Well, I paid the bill on that cell phone. Okay, well, they broke a rule. You're still gonna get the phone, but we need you to reiterate to the child that this is a rule. You signed that piece of paper at the beginning of the school year saying you read the rule book and you and your child both abide by the rules. Now you're here acknowledging that you don't care about the rules. So why should your child care about the rules? And if a child doesn't care about the rules, your child doesn't care about education, the other child becomes miseducated or uneducated, and they fall behind. Uneducated children, particularly children of color, will fall not just through the cracks, they'll fall through gaping fissures in the ground and end up in places that they were never meant to end up in. And part of it is the fault of the parent, the church, and the community. This has kind of been a much longer rant than I'd intended. I was really only meant to talk for about 5 or 10 minutes and upload this thing, but it's been a little bit longer. So what am I proposing? What I'm proposing is that we need to talk. And not just talk at each other, but listen to each other. And then be willing to sit down at a table and discuss the hard truths, but also look for serious, honest solutions. Be active participants in, making us a better people and making our communities a better place. In the Black community, we've got to take a better role in policing ourselves, take a better role in educating ourselves. If we have a child who knows all the cheat codes for the video games, but can't read on their grade level, that's wrong. If we have parents who are buying their kids $100 shoes, $200 shoes, pants, shirts, or whatever, but don't buy them books to read, and then require that they read them, that's wrong. And so there's work that we need to be willing to do in our own community as Black people, as in this country, as African Americans in this country, that we need to be willing to do on a day-to-day basis to ensure that our children are being given the right information and being set up for success, but also they're being willing to sit down with people that don't look like us, those who don't have the melanin that we have in our skin, and then say to those individuals that some things aren't right, and some of those things that aren't right, yes, are our fault, but some of them are yours. And then we will sit down and have conversations about how that we can move forward. And if you have to be Caucasian and listening to this, you've got to be willing to come to the table and look at me as an equal, and then be willing to hear what I have to say. And no, you can say, well, I didn't own slaves, and I didn't do this, and I didn't do that, but your ancestors did, and you benefited from them doing that. You benefit from a system that you're not subjected to. Anytime you can operate outside of a system, you benefit from that system. And even if you say, well, I empathize with the person that is within the system, you don't really empathize with that person until you are willing to switch places with that person, or and either take the same punishment, take the same subjection, be subjected to the same things, or just decide that you're going to break the system and create a new system that's fair and equal for everybody. And so what I'm talking about is not a quick fix. This is not the Matrix, the red or the blue pill, but this is more of a systematic thing. We deal with systematic racism in this country. And in order to deal with a system, you have to build a system to deal with the system. Really quick, when I talk about systematic racism, what I'm literally talking about is this. Okay, let's go back to the Great Depression. The Great Depression, we had a whole lot of stuff going on. People losing money like crazy because banks had gambled with people's money and lost it. So we put things in place like the Glass-Steagall Act, which said that there's separation of banks, that you have investment banks and then you have brokerages and firms and other banks so that you have banks that save money and banks that spent money and gambled money, and those two banks could be one and the same. And so if you put your money into an investment house and that where your money was supposed to be building, they weren't gambling your money over here in places that where you could lose your money. Go from there to the 80s. In the 80s, Reagan deregulates all of that, and so now that banks can merge and form these conglomerates, and now it's a free for all. Then they go in and they do some other things within the construct of the system that allow people to create these crazy mortgages, which is why you talk to some people and their mortgage might have said SunTrust 1 week, but 2 months from that it says Bank of America. 2 months after that it says Wachovia or First Union or Dominion or whoever, because what they were doing is they were packaging bad mortgages with good mortgages and selling them so that they were playing hot potato, basically. So making money off bad mortgages, and then they couple two good mortgages with a bad mortgage, and so they were selling them off. Well, the problem in this country is when you have NAFTA that comes out, and then we start shipping jobs overseas, people who used to have good jobs now are losing those jobs, and then we say stuff like, "Well, start a business. You got skills. Start your business." Well, in this country, the number one way to start a business for small businesses is through taking out an equity loan in your house. But people are starting to lose homes because of all these bad mortgages, so you don't have the equity to borrow against to start the business. So you can't start the business because you don't have the equity, because the loan has been sold off, and then you lost the job, so then you can't afford the balloon payments on the loans, and it becomes all one this just great big storm of stuff. And so you end up with people that's a system, who are subjected to a system that really becomes a perfect storm that they can't get out of. And so in order to combat a system like that, you've got to have another system that is built in place that can combat that system. One person or one small group of people can't break that system. You need another interconnected system in place to break that system. And in order for us to look at poverty and racism and the miseducation of our country and the undereducation, particularly in the black communities, when you're dealing with black and brown people, we need to set up systems that help us combat those things. Where we're looking at individuals coming out of high school and going into the college, into the work world, everybody is not going to everybody doesn't need to go to a 4-year university. If your passion is plumbing, you don't need to go to some major 4-year. I got Miami Hurricanes on here, or you don't need to go to Duke. You don't need to go to Alabama or Clemson or Ohio State or UCLA or USC or Oregon or any of those places if you want to be a plumber. If you want to be a plumber, you go to your local plumbers union. They have a test. You study for the test. You take the test. You pass it. You get into the plumbers union, and you can go on and have a long, fruitful career without having to go through the 4 years of school. It depends on the individual. And so that's another thing we'll start talking about. Because in this country, education has become a racket where we tell everybody to go to college. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-college. I can't be anti-college. My student loans say I can't be anti-college. Uh, However, what we have to be is developers and start figuring out how to develop children, how to develop them at an early age and start to figure out where they're going to be successful. Because I think part of the problem with some people not finishing college is we're pushing some people towards college when that's not their aptitude. That's not what they want. That's not what how they want their lives to go. And then we're going to be honest to say some of the things that we're requiring of people, particularly in those first 2 years of college, that the basic stuff, is not always stuff that's necessary based on what the person is trying to do with their life. You know, and so we have to be very honest about that. Um, there's a lot of work to do. Um, you can agree, you can disagree, you can leave comments. I invite you to. One of the things that I will say is I invite you to take the time, to take moments to figure out where you are in life, look at the systems and things that have been in place that helps you to get there or cause you to to land there, even if it wasn't what you wanted, and start to figure out if you don't like that place, how to keep other people out of that place, how to keep your children, cousins, friends, whatever. And then let's figure out we can reach across the aisle, talk across the aisle, and in some cases force other people, the people on the other side of that aisle, to come to the table to have conversations. In the church, in particular, this idea of being reconciled. We're not reconciling race, we're not reconciling color, or really reconciling is the heart. Because you can't legislate morality. That's a heart condition. And we've got to push people to change that condition of their heart so that we can change the condition of their mind, so that we can change the action or inaction or reaction, so that we can change communities and change this nation. So, idea about Make America Great Again, I kind of dislike that. That's really a play on Reagan's Make America Great thing, because I ask the question all the time, what does that mean to be great again? And at what point were we great? Because the American Indian might say things were really good before the European got here. And so it becomes contextual. At what point are we trying to make America great back again, too? And so let's just say, let's make America what it should be. Let's make this world a better place. Let's do it in the name of human decency and kindness, and yes, in the name of Jesus Christ. But let's do it in a way where all people are supplied dignity, all people are supplied basic human necessity, and all people are given a level of equality um, that the fact that I have life says I should have. Um, this has been much longer than I anticipated. I keep saying that. But I hope it's been informative. I hope I've helped to push some thought. And I look forward to hearing what people have to say. This has been Kevin McNeil, Reverend Kevin, Revy Mac, Pastor Kevin, Kevin, Kev. For some people, leave comments, leave whatever, hit me up. Let's talk. Let's see where we go from here. Be blessed.